The sound begins before dawn, when the world still holds its breath in darkness. A single bell, deep and resonant, rolls across the sleeping abbey. Its tone carries through stone corridors, over dormitory walls, and into the dreams of those who have learned to hear it even in their deepest sleep. This is not a jarring alarm, but a gentle reminder that time continues its patient march, that another day has arrived with the same quiet certainty as all the days before. In the medieval abbey, bells were more than instruments. They were the voice of time itself, the heartbeat of a community organized around prayer, work, and rest. And behind each bell, pulling the ropes with practiced hands, stood figures we rarely consider. The bell ringers, those who marked the hours and called the faithful to their duties. Tonight, we follow them through their days and nights, discovering a world where time moved differently, where the rhythm of bells created a kind of music that shaped every moment of monastic life. These were not dramatic lives filled with grand adventures. They were lives of repetition, of careful attention, of small satisfactions found in work done well. The bell ringer rose in darkness, climbed narrow stairs, read the passage of sand through glass, and pulled ropes that had been pulled by countless hands before. In winter, their fingers went numb. In summer, sweat dampened their robes. Through it all, they maintained their vigil, ensuring that time was properly marked, that the community's rhythm remained unbroken. There is something deeply calming about understanding their world. In our age of constant notifications and digital alarms, the idea of time measured by bells and hourglasses feels almost impossibly distant. Yet these people lived full lives within that slower rhythm. They found meaning in their repetitive tasks. They took pride in the precision of their work. And perhaps most remarkably, they discovered that the very act of marking time could become a form of meditation, a pathway to the kind of peace we often struggle to find. So settle in as we climb the bell tower together, as we learn to read the hourglass and feel the rope between our hands. We will move slowly through their days, pausing to notice details that might seem insignificant, but which fill their world with quiet purpose. We will understand how they thought about time, how they experienced the passage of hours, and how the bells they rang created an architecture of sound that held the entire community together. The abbey awaits in the pre-dawn darkness. The bells hang silent in their tower. Soon, a figure will emerge from the shadows, carrying a small lantern, ready to begin another day of marking time in the silence. The bell tower stands apart from the main abbey buildings, connected by a covered walkway that protects against rain, but does little to stop the wind. It is a solid structure, built from the same grey stone as everything else in this place, with narrow windows that look out over the abbey grounds and the farmland beyond. The tower rises 4 stories, though the word stories suggests more grandeur than reality provides. These are not spacious floors, but tight, functional spaces, each serving its purpose in the daily routine of timekeeping. On the ground floor sits a small room where the bell ringer sleeps. It is not much larger than the bed it contains, with space enough for a wooden chest, a simple table, and a stool. A crucifix hangs on one wall. A small window, fitted with oiled parchment rather than glass, lets in filtered light during the day. The bed itself is a basic frame with rope supports, topped with a straw mattress that has been compressed by years of use into a shape that barely resembles its original form. A single wool blanket provides warmth, though on the coldest nights it is not quite enough. The bell ringer does not sleep like other people. Their rest comes in segments, interrupted by the need to ring bells at regular intervals throughout the night. They have learned to wake naturally before each appointed hour, though an hourglass kept beside the bed provides confirmation. This is not the troubled sleep of the anxious, but the disciplined rest of someone whose body has adapted to a particular rhythm. They close their eyes knowing they will open them again in a few hours, and this knowledge brings a strange kind of peace. Before dawn on this particular morning, the bell ringer wakes in the familiar darkness. There is no grogginess, no reluctance. The body knows what must be done and prepares itself accordingly. Feet find the cold stone floor. Hands reach for the robe hanging on a peg near the bed. The movements are automatic, performed countless times before, requiring no thought or decision. A tinderbox sits on the table, and the bell ringer works it with practiced efficiency. Cloth catches the spark. A candle wick accepts the flame. Warm light fills the small room, pushing shadows into the corners. This is the first light of the day in the entire abbey, the beginning of everything that will follow. There is a brief moment of satisfaction in this, in being the one who starts each day, though such thoughts come and go without much attachment. The candle is placed in a lantern with horn panels, protecting the flame from draughts. The bell ringer picks up this lantern and opens the door that leads to the stairway. The stairs are worn smooth by centuries of feet, curved slightly in the center where countless treads have left their mark. The lantern light catches the texture of the stone, revealing the small details that daylight often obscures. A crack here, a darker patch there. The regular pattern of the mason's chisel marks. Each step is familiar, each turn of the spiral staircase anticipated. The first level above the sleeping chamber contains the mechanism for the abbey's clock, though clock is perhaps too generous a word. It is a collection of weights, gears, and escapements that occasionally manage to keep something approximating accurate time. The bell ringer has learned not to trust it completely, relying instead on the hourglasses that provide more reliable measurements. Still, the mechanism requires attention, and the bell ringer pauses to check its operation. The weights hang from ropes, descending through holes in the floor below. When they reach the bottom of their travel, they must be wound back up, a task that requires considerable effort, and which the bell ringer performs once each day. The gears themselves are wooden, cut and shaped by craftsmen who understood the principles of their work even if they could not explain them in technical terms. They mesh together with reasonable precision, though occasionally a tooth will catch or slip, requiring adjustment. The escapement makes a steady tick-tock sound, quieter than you might expect, almost gentle. It is a sound the bell ringer has heard so many times that it has become part of the background of existence, noticed only in its absence. When the mechanism stops, when that steady rhythm ceases, the silence feels wrong, and the bell ringer immediately knows something requires attention. This morning, everything operates as it should. The weights descend at their proper rate. The gears turn without hesitation. The escapement maintains its rhythm. The bell ringer makes a small mark on a wooden tablet, recording this observation, then continues up the stairs. The second level above the sleeping chamber holds the hourglasses. There are several of them, different sizes for different purposes. The primary timekeeper is a large glass, carefully constructed and regularly tested against the movement of the sun. It measures 1 hour precisely, or as precisely as such things can be measured in this era. When all the sand has flowed from the upper chamber to the lower, the bell ringer knows that an hour has passed and that it is time to ring the appropriate bell. Smaller hourglasses measure shorter intervals. Quarter hours, half hours, even intervals as brief as a few minutes for timing specific tasks. The bell ringer has learned to judge time by eye as well, knowing roughly how much sand should have fallen for any given portion of an hour. But the glasses provide certainty in a world where certainty is often elusive. The act of turning an hourglass has its own small ritual. The bell ringer lifts the glass from its stand, feels its weight, turns it smoothly so the sand begins its descent, and places it back in position. There is a brief moment after the turn when the sand settles, finding its path through the narrow waist of the glass, and then the flow begins in earnest. Individual grains are invisible, but their collective movement creates a subtle sound, a whisper that speaks of time's passage. The bell ringer watches the sand for a moment, mesmerized by its steady flow, despite having seen this same sight thousands of times. There is something eternally fascinating about the hourglass, about this simple yet elegant method of measuring time. The sand cares nothing for human concerns. It falls at its appointed rate, indifferent to whether the day is warm or cold, whether the abbey thrives or struggles, whether anyone watches or not. In this indifference lies a kind of truth about time itself. Satisfied that the glass is properly set, the bell ringer continues up the stairs to the bell chamber. This is the heart of the tower, the reason for everything else. Here hang the bells, 5 of them, each with its own voice and purpose. They are arranged by size from the smallest, which might weigh 30 pounds, to the largest, a massive bronze bell that weighs close to 1,000 pounds and requires considerable strength to ring properly. Each bell has a name, though these names are simple and functional, rather than poetic. There is the matins bell, rung for the night office that begins around 2 in the morning. The Lord's bell for the morning service at dawn. The prime bell for the first hour after sunrise. The terce bell for the 3rd hour. The sext bell for midday. The nun bell for the 9th hour. The vespers bell for evening prayer. The compline bell for the final service before sleep. Between these major offices, smaller bells mark the hours, call workers to meals, signal the beginning and end of work periods. The ropes hang down through holes in the floor, extending into the chamber below, where they are easier to pull. But the bell ringer likes to come up to the bells themselves sometimes, especially in these quiet hours before the abbey wakes, to stand among these silent bronze giants and feel their presence. There is a particular smell in the bell chamber, a mixture of metal and old rope, and the stone dust that seems to permeate everything in the tower. It is not unpleasant, merely distinctive, the smell of this specific place. The bells themselves are beautiful objects, despite their purely functional nature. Each was cast by a bell founder who understood not just the technical requirements of their craft, but also something deeper about how sound works, about how the shape and thickness of bronze determines the tone it will produce. The largest bell bears an inscription in Latin, a prayer or dedication that the bell ringer has read many times, but whose words have become so familiar they are almost invisible. Running a hand along the surface of a bell, the ringer feels the subtle imperfections in the casting, the slight variations in texture that give each bell its unique voice. The bronze is cold to the touch, especially in winter. Though, after the bell has been rung many times, it retains some warmth from the vibrations that pass through it. There are small dents and marks accumulated over years of use, each one a tiny piece of history. A moment when the clapper struck perhaps slightly off-center or with unusual force. The bell ringer checks each clapper, ensuring it hangs properly and moves freely. These heavy iron pieces must swing true to strike the bell at the correct point. If a clapper becomes loose or misaligned, the bell's tone changes, sometimes dramatically. The abbey's community would notice such a change immediately. These people live by the sound of bells, can distinguish each one by its voice, know what each tone means and what action it demands of them. Satisfied that everything is in order, the bell ringer descends to the ringing chamber. The level below the bells, where the ropes are more easily accessed. Here, the ceiling is lower, the space more cramped. The ropes pass through the floor above and are tied off at a height that allows the ringer to pull them effectively without excessive reaching. Each rope is labeled, though the bell ringer knows them by feel as much as sight. The rope for the great matins bell is thicker, worn smooth by countless hands. The smaller bell ropes are thinner, newer, replaced more frequently because they bear less weight and wear differently. The hourglass downstairs shows that it is nearly time for matins. The bell ringer takes hold of the appropriate rope, feeling its familiar texture, the way it has been shaped by use. There is a moment of preparation, a gathering of attention, and then the pull begins. Ringing a large bell is not a matter of simple strength, though strength certainly helps. It requires timing, rhythm, an understanding of how the bell wants to move. The first pull starts the bell swinging. The second pull, timed to match the bell's natural period, increases the swing. Gradually, with each pull, the bell's arc grows until finally the clapper strikes the bronze with a deep, resonant tone that rolls through the tower and out across the sleeping abbey. The sound fills everything. It is not just heard but felt, a vibration that passes through the tower's stones, through the floor beneath the ringer's feet, through the very air. The rope pulls back as the bell swings, and the ringer must time each subsequent pull to maintain the rhythm without fighting the bell's momentum. Too early and the effort is wasted. Too late and the rhythm breaks. For several minutes, the bell ringer maintains this pattern, sending the deep tones of the matins bell out into the darkness. In the dormitory, monks stir in their beds, recognizing the call even in their sleep. In the abbot's chamber, a lamp is lit. In the church, a sacristan begins preparing for the service. The entire community moves in response to this sound, each person knowing their role in the ritual that is about to unfold. Finally, after the prescribed number of rings, the bell ringer begins to slow the bell's swing, pulling less forcefully, allowing the momentum to dissipate gradually. The final tone fades into silence, and for a moment, the tower feels almost painfully quiet after such sound. The bell ringer's arms ache pleasantly from the effort. Sweat dampens the robe despite the morning chill. There is a deep satisfaction in this work, in knowing that the day has been properly begun, that the community has been called to prayer as it has been called for generations. But there is no time to rest. While the monks gather for matins, the bell ringer must prepare for the next hour, turning the hourglass, checking the clock mechanism, ensuring everything is ready for when the office ends and the day's regular work begins. The rhythm of the tower matches the rhythm of the abbey, and both continue their patient, endless cycle. After ringing the matins bell, there is a period of perhaps an hour before the next service. This is time the bell ringer uses for the small maintenance tasks that keep the tower functioning properly. The work is never dramatic, never urgent, but it is essential. A neglected tower becomes unreliable, and an unreliable tower disrupts the entire rhythm of abbey life. The clock mechanism receives attention first. The bell ringer descends to its chamber, carrying the lantern to supplement the early morning light, now beginning to filter through the narrow windows. The mechanism continues its steady operation, but the weights have descended considerably since yesterday's winding. They must be raised before they reach the end of their travel, and the clock stops entirely. Winding the clock is hard work. The rope attached to the weights must be pulled hand over hand, lifting several 100 pounds of iron and stone back to the top of the tower. The bell ringer has learned to pace this effort, pulling steadily rather than straining, pausing occasionally to rest the arms and shoulders. The rope passes over a wooden wheel that turns with a satisfying creak, another sound that has become part of the tower's familiar music. As the weights rise, the bell ringer thinks about the craftsmen who built this mechanism. People whose names are now forgotten, but whose work continues. They shaped each wooden gear, fitted each metal pin, balanced each weight with careful precision. They worked with tools that would seem crude by modern standards. Yet they created something that functions day after day, year after year. There is a lesson in this about the value of patient, careful work, about building things that will outlast their makers. With the weights fully wound, the bell ringer checks the escapement again. Listening to its rhythm, watching how the pallets engage and release the escape wheel. Sometimes a drop of oil is needed where wooden parts rub together. The oil used is rendered from animal fat, purified and stored in a small flask kept specifically for this purpose. The bell ringer applies it sparingly, knowing that too much oil can attract dust and gum up the mechanism rather than helping it. The gears themselves show wear in places, small grooves where wood has rubbed against wood over the years. Eventually, these gears will need to be replaced, but that day is still far off. For now, they serve their purpose adequately. The bell ringer makes a note of the wear pattern, information that might be useful to whoever tends this mechanism in future years. From the clock chamber, the bell ringer moves to check the bell ropes. Each rope is inspected for signs of fraying or wear. The portions that pass through the floor openings receive particular attention, as this is where the rope rubs against stone and deteriorates most quickly. A rope that breaks during ringing could cause injury, or worse, prevent a service from being announced. Such failures are rare, but vigilance prevents them from becoming less rare. One of the smaller bell ropes shows more wear than the bell ringer likes. It will need to be replaced soon, though not immediately. The bell ringer makes another note, this time on a piece of parchment that serves as a running record of tower maintenance. In a month, or perhaps 2, the rope will be added to the list of supplies requested from the abbey's stores. A new rope will be installed, and the old one will be retired to some less critical purpose. The windows of the bell chamber require checking as well. They are not glazed with glass, but covered with wooden shutters that can be opened or closed depending on weather and season. In winter, the shutters stay mostly closed to keep out wind and snow. In summer, they open wide to allow air circulation and provide cooling. This morning, being late spring, they are partially open, positioned to admit light while blocking the worst of the wind. The bell ringer adjusts one shutter that has worked loose from its hinge, using a small wooden wedge to hold it more securely. This is temporary. The hinge will need proper repair when the abbey's carpenter has time to attend to it. But the wedge will serve for now, and the bell ringer records his need on the same parchment that notes the wearing rope. By now, the sky has begun to lighten in earnest. The darkness is not black, but deep blue, with hints of pink appearing on the eastern horizon. The bell ringer pauses at one of the windows to watch this transformation. This is one of the small pleasures of tower duty, this daily witness to dawn's arrival. From this height, the view extends over the entire abbey complex and beyond to the surrounding farmland. The abbey is built in the traditional pattern, with the church forming the north side of a rectangular cloister. The dormitory extends along the east side, with the chapter house and other administrative buildings below it. The refectory occupies the south side, with the kitchens attached. The west side holds the cellarer's quarters and storage rooms. In the center of this rectangle lies the cloister garden, a square of grass and paths where monks can walk in contemplation. Beyond the cloister buildings spread the working structures of the abbey: the barn, the stables, the bacon house, the brewery, the mill, the blacksmith's forge. Each has its place in the economy of this small, self-contained world. The bell ringer can see them all from this vantage point, can watch the first signs of activity as people emerge to begin their day's work. In the fields beyond the abbey walls, the spring planting is well underway. The bell ringer can see the long furrows, dark against the lighter soil between them. In a few months, these fields will be green with growing grain. Later still, they will turn golden, and the bell ringer will ring bells to mark the rhythm of the harvest. The cycle continues, season following season, the land and the people working together in patterns established long ago. A figure emerges from the dormitory, moving toward the church for lauds. Then another figure, and another. The community gathers in response to the bell that will soon sound. The bell ringer turns from the window and checks the hourglass. Nearly time. The sand has almost completed its journey from top to bottom. The Lord's bell is smaller than the Matins bell, but still substantial, its tone clear and carrying. The bell ringer takes the rope, begins the pull, establishes the rhythm. The bell swings, the clapper strikes, the sound rolls out across the lightening landscape. 7 times the bell rings, marking the canonical hour of Lauds, the morning prayer that celebrates the day's beginning. When the ringing is complete, the bell ringer has a longer period of respite. Lauds is followed by a period of private prayer and reading, then prime at sunrise, but between these events the tower is quiet. This is time for the bell ringer's own breakfast, such as it is. The meal is simple. Bread from yesterday's baking, a bit of cheese, some ale to drink. The bread is coarse and dark, made from flour that includes more than just wheat. It is filling rather than delicious, sustaining rather than pleasurable. The cheese is hard, aged to the point where it requires some effort to bite through. The ale is small beer, weak enough to be consumed throughout the day without intoxication. safer to drink than water from questionable sources. The bell ringer eats slowly, not from any particular mindfulness, but simply because there is time and no reason to rush. A small window in the sleeping chamber admits the growing daylight. Birds can be heard outside, their morning songs adding to the general awakening of the world. These sounds, combined with the taste of bread and cheese and the slight bitterness of the ale, create a moment of simple contentment. After the meal, there is time for the bell ringer's own prayers. A small prayer book, worn from handling, provides the texts. The bell ringer kneels beside the bed, facing the crucifix on the wall, and works through the familiar words. This is not rushed or perfunctory, but genuinely felt. A real communication with the divine as the bell ringer understands it. The prayers ask for strength to perform duties well, for wisdom to know when the clock mechanism needs attention, for patience in the endless repetition of the work. Rising from prayer, the bell ringer feels ready for the day ahead. The sun has broken the horizon now, flooding the world with light. From the tower window, the abbey below looks almost beautiful in this golden illumination. The grey stones warm and somehow welcoming despite their severity. Smoke rises from the kitchen chimney. The sound of voices drifts up, though the words are indistinct at this distance. The hourglass shows that prime approaches. The bell ringer climbs once more to the ringing chamber, takes hold of the appropriate rope, waits for the sand to complete its journey. When the final grain falls, the rope is pulled, the bell swings, and another service is announced. The rhythm continues, unchanging and reliable, marking time in the silence. Between the major services, the bell ringer's work finds a different rhythm. The hours must still be marked, but these are not the elaborate peals of the canonical offices. Instead, a single bell rings, sometimes just once, to mark each passing hour. This allows the community to organize their work, to know when to break for meals, when to change tasks, when to gather for the next service. The system of hours in a medieval abbey is not quite like modern timekeeping. The day is divided into two main sections: the period from sunrise to sunset and the period from sunset to sunrise. Each of these sections is further divided into 12 equal parts called hours. But because the length of daylight changes with the seasons, these hours are not constant. A summer daytime hour is longer than a winter daytime hour. The night hours inverse this relationship. The bell ringer has learned to adjust to this system, to judge when each hour ends, not by any mechanical clock, but by understanding the sun's movement and the current season. The hourglass helps, but it must be interpreted in context. Is it summer or winter? Is the day lengthening or shortening? How much daylight remains? These questions inform the bell ringer's judgment about when to mark each hour. Today, being late spring, the hours are approaching their longest. The daytime hours stretch generously, while the night hours are compressed. This means more time in the tower during daylight, more opportunities to see the abbey's daily work unfold below. The bell ringer has come to appreciate these longer days, though the short nights of summer bring their own challenges. After prime, as the community disperses to begin the day's labor, the bell ringer uses the time before the next hourly bell to attend to a task that requires patience and steady hands, maintaining the hourglasses themselves. These instruments are delicate despite their simple appearance. The glass bulbs can crack. The sand can become contaminated with moisture or foreign matter. The wooden frames can warp or split. The bell ringer carefully removes one of the smaller hourglasses from its stand and examines it in the strengthening daylight. The glass appears clear, with no cracks or chips visible. The sand flows freely through the narrow waist without clogging. The seal where the two glass bulbs meet is intact. This glass is in good condition and can be returned to service. Another glass, however, shows a problem. A fine crack has appeared in the upper bulb, barely visible but definitely present. If this glass is used, the crack may widen, eventually breaking the glass entirely and spilling sand everywhere. Better to replace it now, before failure occurs. The bell ringer sets this glass aside and retrieves a replacement from the small store kept for this purpose. Installing a new hourglass requires care. The wooden frame must be adjusted to hold the glass securely without putting stress on the delicate bulbs. Small wooden wedges are inserted and trimmed until the fit is perfect. The bell ringer tests the glass by turning it several times, watching to ensure the sand flows properly and the glass does not shift in its mounting. Satisfied, the new glass is placed in service, and the cracked one is wrapped in cloth and stored. Perhaps the glass blower who visits the abbey twice a year can repair it, or at least salvage the sand and frame for reuse. While working with the hourglasses, the bell ringer becomes aware of sounds from the abbey below. The rhythmic strike of a hammer from the forge, the creak of cartwheels on the path to the fields, voices calling to each other in greeting or instruction. These sounds, filtered through the stone walls and open windows of the tower, create a kind of muted symphony of daily work. The bell ringer listens with half an ear while continuing to examine and clean each hourglass in turn. One glass needs its frame oiled. The wood has dried and shrunk slightly, causing the frame to creak when the glass is turned. A small application of the same oil used for the clock mechanism solves this problem, making the turning smooth and silent again. Another glass has accumulated dust around its seal, and this must be carefully wiped away to prevent it from eventually working its way inside, where it would contaminate the sand. The attention to these details might seem excessive to someone unfamiliar with the work, but the bell ringer knows that small problems ignored become large problems later. A glass that flows irregularly throws off the timing of the entire day. A frame that cracks drops its glass and creates a mess that takes hours to clean up. Better to spend a few minutes each day on preventive maintenance than to deal with catastrophic failures. By the time the hourglass inspection is complete, the first hourly bell is due. The bell ringer checks the primary timekeeper, sees that the sand has nearly run out, and prepares to ring. This is a single stroke, rather than the multiple peals of a service bell, but it still requires proper technique. The rope is pulled smoothly, the bell swings just far enough for the clapper to strike once, and the sound echoes briefly before fading. Below in the fields, workers pause at the sound and note the passage of time. In the abbey's workshops, craftsmen gauge how much of their tasks remain before the next meal. In the church, a priest preparing for later services knows how much time he has to complete his preparations. The entire community orients itself by these sounds, these regular markers that give structure to the day. After ringing the hour, the bell ringer has time for one of the more pleasant tasks: checking the birds that nest in the tower. Pigeons have made homes in several of the higher openings. And while they can be messy, They also provide a kind of companionship. The bell ringer has come to recognize individual birds, noting the one with the slightly crooked toe, the one with darker plumage on its left wing, the one that coos more persistently than its fellows. The nests are built in the gaps between stones, constructed from twigs and feathers, and whatever else the birds can find. Several nests currently contain eggs, pale and smooth, waiting to hatch. The bell ringer checks these nests from a respectful distance, not wanting to disturb the sitting birds, but curious about their progress. This is part of the tower's life, these creatures that share the space and seem unbothered by the regular ringing of bells. Sometimes a young bird falls from its nest, and the bell ringer will attempt to return it, though this is not always successful. Sometimes eggs are abandoned, and then the bell ringer removes them to prevent them from rotting in place. These small acts of tending extend beyond the mechanical duties of timekeeping into something more gentle, more connected to the living world that surrounds the tower. From this high vantage point, other birds can be seen as well. Swallows dart and wheel through the air, catching insects in their swift flights. A crow perches on the roof of the church, preening its feathers in the morning sun. High overhead, almost invisible against the bright sky, a hawk circles on rising thermals, hunting for prey in the fields below. The bell ringer watches these creatures, finding a strange kinship in their daily routines. Their patterns of flight and rest that mirror in some way the patterns of bell ringing and silence. The morning continues its steady progression. Another hour passes. Another bell is rung. The sun climbs higher, and the shadows in the bell chamber shorten. The stone walls that were cool in the early morning begin to warm. The bell ringer feels a change in temperature, notes how the light falls differently at each passing hour. This awareness of subtle shifts and changes has become second nature, a kind of embodied knowledge that goes beyond anything that could be written in a book. Around mid-morning, a visitor arrives at the tower. It is one of the younger monks, sent by the abbot with a message. The bell ringer descends from the ringing chamber to the ground floor to receive it. The young monk is somewhat out of breath from his walk across the abbey grounds, and he takes a moment to compose himself before speaking. The message is simple. The abbot wishes to know whether the bell ringer has noticed any problems with the mechanism that rings the Sanctus bell during Mass. This small bell, which hangs near the altar rather than in the tower, has apparently been sticking lately, ringing less clearly than it should. The abbot hopes the bell ringer might have insight into why this is happening. The bell ringer considers the question thoughtfully. The Sanctus bell is not directly under the tower's care, but all bells share certain common problems. Most likely, the bell ringer suggests, the clapper has worked loose and is not striking the bell squarely. This would cause the tone to sound muffled or dead. The solution is simple: tighten the clapper's mounting. If that doesn't solve the problem, the bell itself might have developed a crack, though this seems less likely given the symptoms described. The young monk thanks the bell ringer for this advice and departs, and the tower returns to its accustomed solitude. These interruptions are infrequent, but not entirely rare. The bell ringer has developed a reputation as someone who understands bells and their mechanisms, and so occasionally people come seeking advice or assistance. These interactions are brief, but provide a welcome change from the tower's isolation. By the time the next hour arrives, the sun has reached its midpoint in the sky. The sext's bell must be rung for the midday office. a more elaborate peal than the simple hourly markers. The bell ringer climbs to the ringing chamber, takes hold of the sexed bell's rope, and begins the familiar pattern of pulls that will summon the community to prayer once again. Midday in the tower brings a particular quality of light and heat. The sun, now directly overhead, floods through the partially open shutters, creating bright rectangles on the stone floor. The walls that were cool in the morning have absorbed warmth, and the air in the ringing chamber feels close, almost stuffy. The bell ringer opens another shutter to encourage air circulation, then retreats to the shadier sleeping chamber below where the day's meal awaits. The midday meal is the main meal of the day, more substantial than the morning bread and cheese. Today, it consists of a thick pottage made from dried peas, onions and herbs, with a small piece of salt pork for flavour. A hunk of bread accompanies this, along with more of the small beer. The abbey provides this meal, sending it up to the tower in a covered pot to keep it warm, along with a wooden bowl and spoon for eating. The bell ringer eats slowly, savouring the warmth and heartiness of the pottage. It is not fancy food, but it is filling and properly seasoned. The salt pork has rendered its fat into the thick mixture, adding richness. The bread, when dipped into the pottage, softens and takes on its flavours. This is good, honest food, the kind that sustains hard work without pretension. After eating, there is a brief period of rest. The bell ringer lies on the bed, not sleeping but simply resting the body, allowing the meal to settle. The tower is quiet now, with most of the community at their own meals, or observing the customary midday rest period. Only the gentle sound of wind through the windows and the distant murmur of pigeons breaks the silence. This rest period is important. The work of bell ringing, while not continuously strenuous, requires constant readiness. The body must be capable of pulling heavy ropes multiple times per day, and fatigue can lead to mistakes or injury. These moments of rest, scattered throughout the day, allow the bell ringer to maintain the necessary strength and alertness. Rising after perhaps half an hour, the bell ringer returns to the upper levels of the tower. The afternoon hours stretch ahead, each one to be marked, several more services to be announced. The rhythm continues, as reliable as the sun's movement across the sky. The afternoon tasks include a more thorough inspection of the bells themselves. The bell ringer climbs to the bell chamber, where the 5 large bells hang silent and waiting. Each bell must be examined for signs of wear or damage, each clapper checked for proper alignment and free movement. The smallest bell is examined first. The bell ringer runs hands over its surface, feeling for cracks or stress marks that might indicate developing problems. Bronze is a durable material, but bells do sometimes crack, especially if they are rung too enthusiastically or struck in cold weather when the metal is less flexible. This bell appears sound, its surface smooth, except for the expected texture of the original casting. The clapper hangs from a leather strap that passes through a mounting on the bell's crown. This leather must be periodically replaced, as it wears from the constant swinging and striking. The bell ringer examines the strap carefully, looking for thin spots or fraying. This particular strap looks good, probably replaced within the past year. It should serve for many more months before needing attention. Each bell receives the same careful inspection. Hands probe for imperfections, eyes scan for cracks, ears listen to the sound of a clapper tapping gently against bronze. The middle bells all pass inspection without concern. But the largest bell, the great matins bell, shows something that requires closer examination. There is a mark on the bell's surface, a small discoloration that the bell ringer does not remember seeing before. It could be nothing, just a stain from water or dirt. But it could also indicate a developing crack, a weakness in the bronze that might eventually lead to catastrophic failure. The bell ringer leans close, using the bright afternoon light to examine this mark carefully. After several minutes of study, the conclusion is that this is indeed just a stain, not a structural problem. The bell appears sound, but the bell ringer makes note of the mark's location and appearance, so that future inspections can determine whether it changes or grows. This kind of vigilance has prevented problems before and will prevent them again. While in the bell chamber, the bell ringer takes time to oil the wooden axles on which the bells swing. This is done several times per year, more frequently for the bells that are rung most often. The oil reduces friction, making the bells easier to ring and reducing wear on both the wooden axles and their supporting beams. The work is straightforward, but requires climbing and reaching into tight spaces, where the axles pass through their mounting brackets. The afternoon sun slants through the windows, at a steep angle now, creating long shadows and highlighting dust motes that drift lazily in the warm air. The smell of the oil mingles with the perpetual scent of stone and bronze. The bell ringer works methodically, ensuring each axle receives proper attention, wiping away excess oil that might drip onto the floor below. From this height, the view extends even further than from the lower windows. The abbey's fields spread in all directions, divided by hedgerows and stone walls into a patchwork of different crops and purposes. Beyond the fields lie woods, dark and dense, source of timber for building and fuel for fires. Further still, barely visible in the distance, another abbey's bell tower rises against the sky, close enough to sometimes hear their bells on quiet days, distant enough to seem part of another world entirely. The work in the bell chamber complete, the bell ringer descends once more to the ringing chamber. Another hour has passed, marked by the hourglass's steady flow. Another bell must be rung, sending its single note out across the afternoon. The rope is pulled, the bell swings, the sound rolls forth. Below, in field and workshop and cloister, people hear and note the passage of time. The afternoon continues in this pattern. Hours are marked, hourglasses turned, small maintenance tasks completed. The sun moves steadily westward, its light growing more golden as it descends toward the horizon. Shadows lengthen. The warmth of midday fades into the more comfortable temperatures of late afternoon. Around what we might call 4 o'clock, though the bell ringer would simply call it the 10th hour, preparations begin for none, the afternoon service that marks the end of the main work period. The non-bell is rung with the same care as all the others, its clear tones calling the community to gather once more in prayer. After none, there is a brief period before Vespers, the evening service. The bell ringer uses this time to tend the lamp that will be needed as darkness approaches. Lamp oil must be checked, wicks trimmed, flint and charcloth verified. These preparations, made while there is still ample daylight, ensure that the tower will not be caught unprepared when night falls. The lamp is a simple pottery vessel with a wick floating in oil. It provides less light than a candle, but burns longer and is less prone to being blown out by drafts. The bell ringer pours fresh oil from a larger container, ensuring the lamp is full. The wick is pulled up slightly and trimmed to an even length. When lit, this lamp will burn steadily for many hours, providing the light needed for nighttime hourglasses and bell ringing. As the sun approaches the horizon, its light takes on a particular quality, soft and warm, painting everything in golden tones. The bell ringer pauses in the day's work to watch the sunset from the western window. This is another of the small privileges of tower duty. These daily exhibitions of natural beauty witnessed from this elevated vantage point. The sky transforms from blue to orange to pink to deep purple, each shade bleeding into the next in a gradual progression that seems almost impossibly slow while actually happening quite quickly. Clouds catch the light and glow as if lit from within. The abbey below falls into shadow, though the tower's upper reaches remain illuminated for a few minutes longer, a reminder of its height. As the last direct sunlight fades, the bell ringer rings the Vespers bell, calling the community to evening prayer. This is one of the major offices, and the bell rings with appropriate solemnity, multiple peals that echo across the gathering darkness. Lights begin to appear in the abbey windows, candles and lamps lit against the coming night. The day is ending, but the tower's work continues. Night in the bell tower is not darkness, but a different kind of light. The lamp burns steadily, casting a warm glow that pushes back the shadows without entirely dispelling them. The stone walls seem to absorb the light, reflecting it softly, creating a space that feels both intimate and ancient. Outside, stars begin to appear. First, a few bright ones, then more and more as the sky darkens fully. The evening hours bring their own rhythm, quieter than the day but no less structured. After Vespers, the community has their light evening meal, then gathers for Compline, the final service before sleep. The bell ringer waits for the appropriate time, turns the hourglass, watches the sand flow, and when the moment arrives, rings the Compline bell. This bell has a particular tone, softer than the others, suited to the peaceful character of the final office. It rings gently, inviting rather than commanding, suggesting rest rather than demanding wakefulness. The bell ringer takes special care with this ringing, making each peal smooth and even, a gift to those preparing for sleep. After Compline, the abbey settles into its night routine. Lights are extinguished. Monks retire to the dormitory. The abbot closes the door to his chamber. The workers in their various quarters prepare for bed. The entire community seeks rest, knowing that in a few short hours the matins bell will wake them once more. But the bell ringer does not sleep through the night. The hours must still be marked, and every 3 hours there is a service to announce. The sleeping pattern, therefore, is fragmented, divided into segments separated by periods of wakefulness. This has been the bell ringer's life for so long that it no longer feels unusual. The body has adapted, finding rest in these shorter periods more effectively than some people find in a full night's uninterrupted sleep. The first segment of night sleep lasts until around midnight, when the bell ringer wakes naturally, consults the hourglass to confirm the time, and prepares to ring the midnight hour. The tower is deeply quiet at this time, the silence almost tangible. Moving through this silence, lantern in hand, the bell ringer climbs to the ringing chamber and pulls the rope once, sending a single bell tone out into the darkness. From the bell chamber looking out into the night, the world appears transformed. The abbey buildings are dark shapes against a slightly lighter sky. The stars overhead are brilliant, undimmed by any competing light. The bell ringer has learned to recognize some of the constellations, can track their movement across the sky through the seasons. Tonight, the belt of Orion is visible, those three bright stars in perfect alignment, surrounded by the dimmer stars that form the hunter's outline. There is something profound about being awake at this hour, while nearly everyone else sleeps. The bell ringer feels a particular connection to the handful of others who keep night watches. The monk assigned to pray in the church through the dark hours, the watchman who patrols abbey grounds, the occasional animal in the barn giving birth or needing attention. These people, like the bell ringer, witness the world at its quietest, its most still. After marking the hour, the bell ringer returns to bed but does not immediately sleep. There is time for reading by lamplight, working through the prayer book, or sometimes a small volume of devotional writings that has been lent to the tower. The words on the page hold meaning beyond their literal content, providing focus for meditation, creating a transition between wakefulness and sleep. Eventually, eyes grow heavy, and the bell ringer sets aside the reading, extinguishes the lamp, and lies back on the bed. Sleep comes easily, the body recognizing its brief window of opportunity. The breathing slows, the mind quiets, and consciousness fades into the gentle realm of dreams. But the sleep is not long. 2 hours later, around 2 in the morning, the bell ringer wakes for matins. This is the deepest part of the night, the hours when sleep is most seductive and waking most difficult. Yet the body performs its duty, rising without complaint, lighting the lamp, climbing the stairs. The matin's bell is rung in complete darkness, its deep tones rolling out across the sleeping landscape. The sound seems louder at night, or perhaps just more noticeable in the absence of competing sounds. The vibration of the bell passes through the tower, through the bell ringer's body, a physical manifestation of time's passage. After the ringing, there is a choice. Return to sleep for a few more hours, or remain awake through the remainder of the night. The bell ringer often chooses to sleep, grabbing whatever rest is possible before the Lord's bell at dawn. These fractured hours of sleep are not ideal, but they are sufficient. The body has learned to make the most of them, and so the night progresses, marked by bells and hourglasses, by sleep and waking, by the steady rotation of the stars overhead. The pattern has repeated countless times before, and will repeat countless times again. There is comfort in this repetition, in the knowledge that the tower's work continues regardless of individual circumstances, regardless of personal feelings or temporary difficulties. The final weeks of spring bring changes to the tower's routine. The days continue to lengthen, and soon they will reach their maximum length at the summer solstice. This means the daytime hours grow longer still, and the nighttime hours compress further. The bell ringer adjusts the timekeeping accordingly, using the sun's position to judge when each hour truly ends. One morning, after several days of clear weather, clouds begin to gather on the horizon. The bell ringer notices them while watching the dawn, seeing how they mass and darken, promising rain before the day is out. This is useful information for the abbey's workers, who will want to complete outdoor tasks before the weather turns. When the opportunity arises, the bell ringer mentioned the approaching rain to a passing monk, who carries the news to those who need to know. The rain arrives around midday, beginning as a gentle patter against the stones and gradually increasing to a steady downpour. The bell ringer closes most of the shutters to keep out the driving rain, leaving only narrow gaps for light and air. The sound of rain on stone and roof tiles creates a constant background noise. Not unpleasant, almost soothing in its steadiness. Inside the tower, protected from the weather, the bell ringer continues the usual tasks. Hourglasses are turned, bells are rung, the clock mechanism is checked. The rain makes no difference to these duties, though it does make the stone floors slippery and requires extra care when climbing the stairs. By evening, the rain has lessened to a drizzle, and the clouds begin to break apart, revealing patches of clearer sky. The sunset that evening is spectacular, the light filtered through layers of clouds in shades of orange and red and purple that seem almost unreal in their intensity. The bell ringer watches from the western window, grateful for this unexpected beauty. This reminder that even routine days can contain moments of wonder. The weeks continue their progression, each day slightly different from the last, yet fundamentally the same. The bell ringer marks time, maintains the tower, performs all the small tasks that keep the system functioning. There are no dramatic events, no crises or catastrophes. Just the steady, patient work of ensuring that time is properly measured and announced. Sometimes, late at night, when the tower is quietest, the bell ringer thinks about the nature of this work. It might seem monotonous to outsiders, this endless cycle of ringing bells and turning hourglasses. But there is a deep satisfaction in it, a sense of purpose that goes beyond the immediate tasks. The bell ringer is keeping time for an entire community, providing the structure around which hundreds of other lives organize themselves. This is not nothing. This is essential work, even if it is humble. The bells themselves become almost like companions over the years. The bell ringer knows each one's voice, can distinguish them not just by pitch, but by subtle qualities of tone and resonance. The great Matins bell speaks with a deep authority. The Lord's bell sings more brightly. The smaller bells each have their own character, their own way of announcing their presence. There is a relationship between the bell ringer and these bronze instruments, built through years of daily interaction. The ringer knows exactly how each bell wants to swing, how much force is needed for each rope, how the weight and momentum feel in the hands. This knowledge is embodied, existing more in muscle memory than conscious thought, but it is real and valuable nonetheless. As summer approaches, bringing with it the longest days and shortest nights, the bell ringer prepares for the seasonal adjustments that must be made. The hourglasses will need to be recalibrated slightly to account for the changing length of hours. The shutters will be opened wider to allow more air circulation during the hot days. The lamp oil consumption will decrease as the nights grow shorter. These seasonal changes are part of the tower's eternal rhythm, as predictable as the bells themselves. The bell ringer has lived through many such cycles, has learned to read the subtle signs that indicate where, in the year's progression, the community currently stands. This awareness connects the tower to the larger movements of earth and sun, making the bell ringer a kind of intermediary between cosmic time and human time. On a day in early summer, a special visitor comes to the tower. It is a young man, newly arrived at the abbey, and designated to learn the bell ringer's craft. This is not unexpected. The current bell ringer has been performing this duty for many years, and while there is no immediate plan for retirement, it is prudent to train someone who can assist and eventually take over the role. The young man is nervous, uncertain of what will be expected of him. The bell ringer greets him kindly, remembering what it felt like to first enter this tower as a learner. How intimidating the bell seemed. How complex the system of timekeeping appeared. There is empathy in the greeting, an understanding that learning takes time and patience. The training begins simply. The bell ringer explains the layout of the tower, pointing out each level and its function. They start at the ground floor, with the sleeping chamber and its sparse furnishings. Then up to the clock mechanism, explaining in basic terms how the weights and gears work together to measure time. Higher still to the hourglass room, demonstrating how to turn the glasses and read their progress. The young man absorbs this information with varying degrees of understanding. Some concepts are immediately clear, while others require repeated explanation. The bell ringer is patient, remembering that even the simplest tasks, once fully understood, seemed baffling at first encounter. Learning is a process, and there is no need to rush it. They climb to the bell chamber and hear the young man's eyes widen. The bells are larger than he expected, more imposing. The thought of being responsible for ringing them seems suddenly overwhelming. But the bell ringer speaks calmly about each bell, explaining its purpose, demonstrating the proper way to handle the ropes. You don't fight the bell, the bell ringer explains. You work with it. Each bell has a natural rhythm, a way it wants to swing. Your job is to find that rhythm and support it, not to impose your will on the bell. The young man nods, though it's clear he doesn't fully grasp this concept yet. Understanding will come with practice, with the feel of rope in hand and the feedback of the bell's weight and momentum. These are things that must be experienced rather than explained. For the first lesson, the bell ringer demonstrates ringing one of the smaller bells. The movements are broken down into steps. The initial pull to start the swing, the timing of subsequent pulls, the gradual increase of amplitude until the clapper strikes. The young man watches carefully, trying to memorize the sequence. Then it's his turn. The bell ringer guides him to the appropriate rope and steps back. The first few pulls are awkward, badly timed, resulting in jerky movements of the bell that never quite achieve enough swing for the clapper to strike. But the bell ringer offers gentle corrections. Pull a bit earlier. Yes, like that. Now feel how the bell pulls back on the rope. Use that rhythm. Gradually, through trial and error, the young man begins to find the pattern. The bell starts to swing more smoothly. The pulls become better timed. And then finally, the clapper strikes the bell, producing a clear tone that fills the chamber. The young man's face lights up with satisfaction at this small success. Good, the bell ringer says simply. That's the foundation. Everything else builds from there. They practice for a while longer, until the young man can reliably ring the small bell. His arms are tired from the unfamiliar exertion, and there will be soreness tomorrow. But he's accomplished something real. The bell ringer remembers this stage of learning, the physical demands that seemed so challenging at first, but which the body adapted to surprisingly quickly. Over the following days and weeks, the training continues. The young man comes to the tower each day for a few hours, learning different aspects of the work. He practices ringing various bells, starting with the smallest and gradually working up to the larger ones. He learns to read the hourglasses, to check the clock mechanism, to perform basic maintenance tasks. The bell ringer teaches not just the technical skills, but the rhythm of the work, the way one task flows into another, how to organize the day so that everything gets done without rush or panic. This is harder to teach than rope pulling techniques, but it's equally important. The Taoist work succeeds through steady, patient attention over time, not through bursts of intensive effort. One lesson focuses on the nighttime duties. The young man comes to the tower one evening and stays through the night, experiencing the fragmented sleep pattern, the midnight waking, the pre-dawn ringing of the matins bell. It's difficult for him, this interruption of normal sleep, and he struggles to wake when required. Your body will adapt, the bell ringer assures him. For the first few weeks, it's hard, but eventually you'll wake naturally before the bells need ringing. The body learns the rhythm, just as it learns the rope pulling. The young man looks doubtful, but accepts this on faith. He has already learned that the bell ringer's words, though sometimes cryptic, invariably prove accurate with time and experience. As the training progresses, the bell ringer feels a quiet satisfaction in passing on this knowledge, in ensuring that the tower's work will continue beyond any individual tenure. This is part of the timekeeping tradition, this transfer of skill and understanding from one generation to the next. The bells have been rung for centuries, and they will continue to be rung for centuries more, as long as each bell ringer takes seriously the responsibility of training their successor. Summer reaches its peak, bringing the longest days and the brightest sunshine. The tower becomes quite warm during the afternoon hours, and the bell ringer keeps the shutters open to maximize air circulation. Even so, the stone walls retain heat, and the higher levels of the tower are uncomfortable by midday. The summer schedule brings certain advantages. The longer daylight hours mean more time for maintenance tasks, for inspections that require good light, for repairs that are easier to perform when you can see clearly what you're doing. The bell ringer takes advantage of this, working through a list of tasks that have accumulated over the winter and spring. One major project is the thorough cleaning of the bell chamber. Over time, dust and debris accumulate around the bells, blown in through the windows or carried up from below. Bird droppings from the pigeons that roost in the tower add to the mess. The floor needs sweeping, the walls need wiping down, the bells themselves need cleaning. The bell ringer approaches this task systematically, starting with the ceiling and working downward. A long-handled brush removes cobwebs from the rafters. A cloth dampened with water cleans the walls, revealing stone that had been dulled by accumulated grime. The floor is swept thoroughly, the debris collected and carried down to be disposed of in the midden. Cleaning the bells themselves is delicate work. The bronze must be wiped carefully to avoid scratching it, using soft cloths and gentle circular motions. Years of ringing have left marks where the clapper strikes, slight indentations that cannot and should not be removed. But the rest of the surface can be cleaned to reveal the metal's natural luster. As the bell ringer works, thoughts drift to the craftsman who cast these bells, perhaps 100 years ago or more. They worked with fire and molten metal, with knowledge passed down through generations of bell founders. They understood the ratios of copper and tin that produce the best bronze for bells. They knew how to create the distinctive shape that allows a bell to ring clearly. They poured their skill and knowledge into these instruments, creating objects that have outlasted them and will outlast many more generations. The work of cleaning takes several days, performed in segments between the regular duties of ringing and timekeeping. But eventually it's complete, and the bell chamber looks better than it has in years. The bells hang clean and bright. The floor is swept. The walls are clear of grime. There's a satisfaction in this, in having restored order and cleanliness to this important space. Other summer tasks include replacing worn rope sections. Not entire ropes, but just the parts that show the most wear. This is done by splicing in new segments, a skill that the bell ringer has developed over years of practice. The splice must be smooth and strong, creating no bulge that would catch on the floor openings or the ringer's hands. The work requires patience and careful attention to detail, ensuring each strand of the rope is properly incorporated into the splice. The young trainee assists with some of these tasks, learning not just the techniques, but the standards of quality that the tower's work demands. Good enough is not actually good enough when lives and schedules depend on the reliable operation of this system. The bell ringer emphasizes this repeatedly, showing the difference between work that merely functions and work that functions well over time. As summer progresses, the abbey's fields fill with growing crops. The bell ringer watches from the tower as wheat and barley grow tall, as beans climb their poles, as vegetables swell in the abbey's garden. These growing things represent the labor of many people. Work organized and structured by the bells that mark each day's hours. The connection between the tower and the fields is real, even if it's easy to overlook. The summer also brings visitors to the abbey, travelers seeking hospitality, pilgrims on their way to shrines, merchants with goods to trade. Sometimes these visitors ask to see the bell tower, curious about the source of the sounds that structure abbey life. The bell ringer occasionally agrees to such tours, showing visitors the clock mechanism and hourglasses, explaining the basics of timekeeping. These visitors bring news from the wider world, stories of events in distant places, information about kings and wars, and harvests in other regions. The bell ringer listens politely to these accounts, absorbing information about the world beyond the abbey's walls. But there's also a sense that such things are distant, almost abstract. The real world, the important world, is right here. The tower, the bells, the steady marking of time. One particularly hot day, the bell ringer discovers a problem with the clock mechanism. One of the wooden gear teeth has split, compromising its ability to properly mesh with the adjacent gear. This is a significant issue, requiring actual repair rather than just maintenance. The bell ringer examines the damage carefully, considering the options. The gear will need to be replaced, but this is not a simple task. The mechanism must be partially disassembled to remove the damaged gear. A new gear must be fashioned, either by the abbey's carpenter or by sending for a craftsman who specializes in such work. In the meantime, the clock will need to be stopped, its weight removed so it doesn't cause further damage. The bell ringer reports this problem to the abbot, explaining the situation and requesting permission to proceed with the repair. The abbot asks intelligent questions about how long the repair will take and how the timekeeping will be affected. The bell ringer explains that the hourglasses can continue to provide reliable time, that the bells will still ring on schedule, that only the clock mechanism itself will be out of service. Permission granted? The bell ringer begins the careful process of disassembling the affected section of the mechanism. Each piece is removed methodically, with attention to how it fits, so that reassembly will be straightforward. The damaged gear is eventually extracted and brought to the abbey's carpenter, who examines it with a practiced eye. "This will take a few days," the carpenter says. "I'll need to select the right wood, cut it to proper dimensions, shape each tooth precisely. But it can be done." The bell ringer thanks the carpenter and returns to the tower, where the mechanism sits partially dismantled, waiting for its new part. This is an unusual situation, seeing the clock in pieces, but it's also an opportunity to clean and inspect components that are normally inaccessible. The bell ringer takes advantage of this, wiping away accumulated grime, checking for other signs of wear that might require future attention. A week later, the new gear is ready. The carpenter has done excellent work, shaping each tooth to match the others, ensuring smooth operation. The bell ringer carefully installs the new gear, tests its mesh with adjacent gears, then gradually reassembles the mechanism. The weights are reinstalled, the escapement is engaged, and the familiar tick-tock resumes. The bell ringer monitors the repaired clock closely for several days, making small adjustments to ensure it runs smoothly. Eventually, satisfied that the repair is successful, attention returns to the regular rhythm of daily tasks. The clock incident becomes another entry in the tower's ongoing history, a small challenge met and overcome. As summer fades toward autumn, the days begin to shorten noticeably. The bell ringer adjusts the timekeeping accordingly, recalculating the length of hours to account for the changing daylight. This is a gradual process, not a sudden shift, but it requires constant attention to keep the tower's time aligned with the sun's movement. The autumn brings its own beauty to the view from the tower. The surrounding woods change color, their leaves transforming from green to yellow, orange, and red. The fields turn golden as crops ripen and are harvested. The abbey's workers bring in the wheat and barley, storing it against the coming winter. The bell ringer rings bells that mark the rhythm of this harvest work, watching from above as the fruits of the year's labor are gathered. One clear autumn day, the young trainee arrives at the tower for his lesson, to find the bell ringer not in the usual places. After checking the sleeping chamber, the ringing chamber, and the hourglass room, he finally climbs to the very top of the tower, above even the bell chamber to the roof itself. There he finds the bell ringer standing against the parapet, looking out over the landscape. The view from here is extraordinary, extending for miles in every direction. The abbey and its fields appear as a carefully organized pattern, surrounded by the natural chaos of woods and streams. Other abbey towers are visible in the distance, tiny points on the horizon that mark other communities keeping their own time. "Come see," the bell ringer says, gesturing to the young trainee. "It's important to understand the context of our work." The young man approaches the parapet carefully. Heights make him nervous, and looks out. Even he can appreciate the beauty of the scene. The way the autumn light paints everything in warm tones. The patterns created by human labor and natural growth. All those people down there, the bell ringer continues, they organize their lives around the bells we ring. When they hear the matins bell, they know it's time to wake for prayer. When they hear the meal bell, they know it's time to gather in the refectory. Our work is invisible, but it shapes everything that happens in this place. The young man nods, beginning to understand the responsibility he's being trained to accept. It's not just about pulling ropes and turning hourglasses. It's about being part of something larger, about maintaining a system that serves an entire community. They stand together in silence for a few minutes, bell ringer and trainee, looking out over the landscape. Then, because the hourglasses do not wait even for contemplative moments, they descend to continue the day's work. The training has progressed well. The young man can now ring all the bells competently, can maintain the hourglasses and clock mechanism, can organize the daily schedule of tasks. Soon he will be ready to take on night duty, and then, eventually, to assume the role of bell ringer himself. The current bell ringer feels the satisfaction of knowing the work will continue, that the knowledge has been successfully transferred. As the weeks pass and autumn deepens, the bell ringer reflects on the years spent in this tower. It has been a good life, not easy but meaningful. The work has provided purpose and structure, a reason to rise each day and attend carefully to the passing hours. The tower has been both workplace and home, its stones as familiar as the sound of the bells. There have been challenges, certainly. The isolation can be difficult, especially during long winter nights. The fragmented sleep pattern is not ideal, though the body has adapted. The physical demands of rope pulling take their toll over time, leaving shoulders and arms sometimes sore. But these difficulties are minor compared to the satisfactions. The daily witness to beauty from the tower windows, the pride in work done well, the knowledge that this service matters to others. The rhythm of the bells has become the rhythm of life itself. The bell ringer no longer thinks in terms of hours and minutes, as the world outside the abbey might measure them. Instead, time is measured in services. Matins, to lauds, to prime, to terce, to sext, to none, to vespers to compline, and back to matins again. Between these fixed points, the hourly bells provide finer divisions, but it's the services that truly structure existence. Winter approaches, bringing shorter days and longer nights. The bell ringer prepares the tower for the cold season, checking that shutters close properly, ensuring adequate supplies of lamp oil and candles, bringing in extra blankets for the bed. The clock mechanism is given a thorough inspection, knowing that cold weather can cause wooden parts to shrink and metal parts to contract. The first snow of winter falls on a quiet afternoon, large flakes drifting down from grey skies. The bell ringer watches from the window as the abbey grounds transform, everything becoming soft and white. The snow muffles sound, and even the bells seem quieter, their tones absorbed by the falling flakes. That night, as the bell ringer climbs the stairs to ring the Compline bell, there is a sense of continuity with all the bell ringers who have performed this same task through countless winters past. The snow falls as it has always fallen. The bells ring as they have always rung. Time continues its patient march, marked and measured by the steady work of human hands. The seasons turn, one following another in their eternal cycle. The bell ringer grows older, as all people do, but the work remains constant. Each day brings the same tasks: hourglasses to turn, bells to ring, mechanisms to maintain. This repetition is not boring, but comforting, a reliable structure in an uncertain world. The young trainee becomes more skilled, more confident. Eventually, the day comes when the bell ringer can step back, can trust the trainee to handle entire days on his own. This transition happens gradually, not all at once. First, the trainee takes on the daytime duties, while the bell ringer handles nights. Then they alternate days. Finally, The trainee assumes full responsibility, and the bell ringer moves to a new role elsewhere in the abbey. But before that transition completes, there is one final night that the bell ringer wishes to experience fully, to imprint deeply in memory. It is a clear winter night, cold and still, with the stars bright overhead. The bell ringer rises at midnight to ring the hour, climbs the familiar stairs, pulls the familiar rope. The single bell tone rolls out across the frozen landscape, and the bell ringer pauses afterward to look out over the sleeping abbey. Everything is peaceful, blanketed in snow, lit only by starlight. The abbey buildings are dark shapes against the white ground. Smoke rises from a few chimneys, barely visible in the darkness. Somewhere an owl calls, otherwise silence. The bell ringer thinks about time, about how it passes whether we mark it or not, whether we pay attention or not. The hourglasses and clocks and bells are human attempts to measure something that is ultimately beyond measurement, to divide into discrete units something that flows continuously. But there is value in the attempt, in the careful attention to passing moments, in the acknowledgement that our time here is limited and therefore precious. The night continues its quiet progression. More hours are marked, more bells are rung. The matins bell calls the community to the deepest night's prayer. Eventually, after what feels like both a very long time and no time at all, the eastern sky begins to lighten. Another dawn approaches. Another day prepares to begin. The bell ringer stands at the eastern window, watching the transformation from darkness to light. This daily miracle never becomes ordinary, never loses its power to inspire a sense of wonder. The sky shifts from black to deep blue, to lighter blue, to pink. The stars fade. The world emerges from shadow. And then, at the proper moment, the bell ringer climbs once more to the ringing chamber and rings the Lord's bell. Its clear tones announce the new day, calling the community to morning prayer, starting the whole cycle over again. The rope feels right in hand. The bell swings true. The sound carries across the awakening landscape, a gift of time given freely to all who listen. In this moment, pulling this rope, ringing this bell, the bell ringer understands something fundamental about the work. It is not about personal achievement or recognition. It is not about being seen or celebrated. It is about service, about maintaining something essential that others depend upon. It is about doing small tasks with great care, about being reliable across countless repetitions, about finding meaning in the ordinary. The bells fall silent. The day begins. Workers emerge from their quarters and head to their tasks. Monks gather in the church. The abbey's daily life organizes itself around the structures that the bells provide. And in the tower, the bell ringer turns another hourglass, checks the clock mechanism, and prepares for whatever the new day will bring. The work continues, as it always has, as it always will. Time passes, marked and measured, structured and announced. The bells ring on, through all the seasons, through all the changes, maintaining their patient vigil over the passing hours. And somewhere, in every generation, a bell ringer stands ready to pull the ropes, to ring the bells, to mark time in the silence,